I feel really good. Thank you for having me on. First off, I appreciate the opportunity. But look, I didn't reach my conclusion lightly. But by the time I made the decision, seeing how we got into this war and seeing the path that we're going down now, I knew that I was doing the right thing.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Genuinely glad you were here for this one because this might be one of the most important conversations we have covered in a long time. So here's the setup. A man who was personally appointed to lead the National Counterterrorism Center walks away from his position and goes public, saying the war never had a legitimate justification and that America was pulled into it by a foreign ally's agenda, and then the very president who appointed him fires back with a personal dig about his late wife. Joe Kent does not flinch. He sits down with Piers Morgan and lays out everything. The intelligence, the pressure, the echo chamber, all of it. With the kind of calm that only comes from someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to say. Stay with this one all the way through because the further it goes, the more intense it gets. The best moments are absolutely not at the beginning. Also, before we jump in, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from right now. We genuinely have people tuning in from everywhere and it always blows me away to see it. Say hello, tell us your city or your country. We read every single one. All right, let's get into it.
There was no real sign that was given either to the American public or even internally that these talks were breaking down. There were talks about this deal. There were talks about getting Iran to back off of the nuclear enrichment. These talks have been going on for quite some time, right? So now there was no indication given to the American people or anybody else that these talks had somehow broken down to a point that now we had to go to war. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there was no evidence that there was any kind of threat towards some immediate action that was going to happen against America or its allies from Iran. So these are two things that did not happen. So what you're saying about all of this stuff is absolutely true and verifiable fact. Like, I'm not arguing that at all.
You just stated is
the
fundamental
false. Point that the fundamental point that I'm making is this: that there was no real reason given to the American public for us to have gone into this war in the way that we have. And now, obviously, things have changed because now we are in this war. And I think that a lot of people want to kind of like next day quarterback this and give a lot of reasons as to why we should be there now that we're already there. And I totally understand that, right? And I totally understand and respect the sacrifice of our troops that have given their lives to this war and to this country. Would never denigrate that for a single solitary second. The reason I am in opposition to this, and the reason that I continue to be in opposition to this, is because when we are going to put American troops in harm's way, and we have already sacrificed the lives of way too many American troops for my liking, and I do believe that there will be more. We owe the American people and we owe our troops an ironclad, rock-solid reason to put them
I can
in
get it if you'd stop talking. I can get it if you'd stop talking.
I'm afraid, guys, we've run out of time. I really appreciate the debate. We could talk for a lot longer, but I appreciate you both joining me. Thank you both very much.
Thanks, Piers.
Thank you, Piers.
Well, Joe Kent is a Gold Star husband, a retired Green Beret, and a veteran of 11 combat tours across 20 years' service in the US Army. President Trump appointed him to the role of director of the National Counterterrorism Center, a position from which he resigned last week. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, he said in his statement. It's clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. And I'm pleased to say that Joe Kent joins me now. Joe Kent, I'm just wondering, a week ago your life was very, very different to what it is today. You've been through what I would call the mincer since you went public. You're a man used to very difficult situations. How are you feeling about how this week has gone for you?
I feel really good. Thank you for having me on. First off, I appreciate the opportunity. But look, I didn't reach my conclusion lightly. But by the time I made the decision, seeing how we got into this war and seeing the path that we're going down now, I knew that I was doing the right thing. And I still feel the same way today. So my main goal is to hopefully change the dialogue on how we're looking at things in Iran, and hopefully give the president some opportunity to get us out of this conflict.
This sort of central charge that there was no imminent threat. We've heard people like Lindsey Graham and others saying they were 2 weeks away from doing something, which seems ridiculous. You were in the perfect position to know what the actual real threat was. How would you assess it?
Here is what gets me every single time I watch this. Rob Smith, a combat veteran, a guy who actually put on the uniform and went to war, is sitting there saying the American people were never given a real reason for this war. And this man is not a liberal commentator. He is not some anti-war activist with a podcast. He is someone who lived it, someone who knows what it actually costs when politicians decide to send people into conflict. And that is why his words hit completely different. You have to understand something. When a country goes to war, there is a basic expectation. You tell the people why, you make the case, you show the evidence, you say, here is the threat, here is what happens if we do nothing, and here is our plan. That is the minimum standard. That has always been the minimum standard. And Rob is saying clearly, that standard was not met here, not even close. And here is what people don't realize, the part that actually matters. He is not saying the troops were wrong to serve. He is saying the opposite. He said he would never denigrate their sacrifice for a single solitary second. What he is saying is that the people making the decisions failed the people doing the fighting. There is a massive difference between those two things, and it is important that we do not confuse them. Think about what he said about owing the troops an ironclad reason. That phrase is not dramatic language. That is a standard that has historically been applied to every major military engagement in modern history. You build the case publicly, you present the intelligence, you make the argument. Hiding the fact that this did not happen, and that a conservative Iraq war veteran is the one pointing it out, tells you everything about where this situation actually stands. And then right at the end of this section, Piers asked Joe Kent to assess the actual threat level. And Joe Kent is not just some commentator. This man was literally placed in charge of national counterterrorism by the administration itself. So when Piers asks him how real was the threat, you already know the answer is going to be something that nobody on the pro-war side wants to hear.
The only imminent threat was of Israel attacking Iran and then Iran retaliating against our bases in the region because the Iranians knew that the Israelis couldn't accomplish this military objective they have of regime change without our support. So we knew that was going to happen. That was the only imminent threat. Once President Trump came into office in 2025, the Iranians closely observed a escalation ladder. By that, I mean, prior to President Trump coming back into office, the Iranian proxies in the region had attacked our troops hundreds of times throughout the region after October 7th. Once Trump came back in, the Iranians deliberately stopped their proxies from attacking our troops, knowing that President Trump wanted to get to the negotiating table. He did just that with Steve Witkoff and others. When the 12-day war was launched, the Iranians didn't attack us. They made sure their proxies didn't attack our forces in the region. They didn't actually take a strike against us until we hit the nuclear facilities. And then they launched an equal amount of missiles that we dropped on bombs, and they dropped on their nuclear facilities. And then they eagerly got back to the negotiating table with us. So there actually was no threat emanating directly from Iran. They had the capability to pose a threat to us, but so do many nations. But we did not have any intelligence to indicate that they were on the cusp of attacking us. The only real threat was from Israel forcing our hand.
And notwithstanding the fact that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, publicly stated that actually America launched a preemptive attack because Israel, he didn't name the country, but it's obvious he was talking about, had indicated they were going to attack Iran and therefore there would be a response and America would have to get involved. They then tried to rein that back. But he was on the record as basically saying, we did this because of Israel's decision to attack. You, with your criticism, have now been accused by Mitch McConnell of being anti-Semitic. You've had Matt Brooks, the president of the Republican Jewish Coalition, saying that your appearance on Tucker Carlson's podcast was part of an ongoing problem, so inferring the same. How do you respond to that charge that you're anti-Semitic?
So in my criticism of really our policy, the American policy towards Israel. I've never mentioned the religion of the people of the state of Israel. My issue is the fact that we have a foreign government that is dictating our policy in the Middle East, and in particular dictating when and how we go to war. That's my main issue. Look, these guys are going to throw out the anti-Semitic claim because they want people debating that, and they also want people to cower because no one wants to be called anti-Semitic. They're doing that because they don't want to discuss the fundamental issue, which is exactly what Secretary Rubio said, that we were forced into this war because we knew that the Israelis were going to attack, which would set off a series of reactions from the Iranians. So that's why we went ahead and conducted the attack, because our hand was forced by the Israelis. That's what Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, and all the neoconservatives don't want to address. And that's the main issue here that we should be discussing.
Of course, at the same time, it's been pretty obvious to people, I think, that from what Antony Blinken said, that Israel had tried this before. They tried to tell President Obama and President Biden, we're going to attack. Are you with us? We're going to attack Iran. Both times the answer came back no. And on both occasions, Israel didn't attack. I thought that was very significant.
And I'm sure the Israelis told the Trump administration this in an effort to get them to be stronger than the Biden administration and than the Obama administration.
This is the moment, right here, because Joe Kent just said something that completely dismantles the entire justification that was used to launch this war. He did not say Iran was cooperating peacefully. He did not say there were zero concerns. What he said was specific and surgical. The only imminent threat came from the possibility of an ally acting unilaterally and dragging America into the consequences. That is a completely different thing than Iran being on the verge of attacking the United States. And here's the part that blows my mind. Joe Kent goes further. He explains that after the administration came back into office, Iran's proxies in the region actually stopped attacking American forces, deliberately stopped, because they wanted to get to the negotiating table. He said they launched an equal response after the nuclear facilities were hit, not before, and then immediately got back to negotiations. That is not the behavior of a country that was planning an imminent strike on America. That is the behavior of a government that was trying to avoid escalation. So when Joe said, we did not have any intelligence to indicate they were on the cusp of attacking us, that statement should have stopped everyone in their tracks, because this is the director of the National Counterterrorism Center saying it, not an opinion columnist, not a political opponent, the person whose entire job was to know exactly that information. And then Piers brings up what the Secretary of State said publicly, on the record, that America launched a preemptive strike because an ally had signaled they were going to act anyway. They tried to walk it back, but you cannot unring that bell when the top diplomat of a country accidentally tells the truth about why a war started, and that reason has nothing to do with a direct threat to American citizens. That is not a small thing. That is the foundation of the entire conflict cracking in real time. Joe's response to being called anti-Semitic for pointing this out is also worth paying attention to. He said he never referenced religion once. His issue is about a foreign government having too much influence over when and how America goes to war. And he is absolutely right that the accusation gets thrown out specifically to shut the conversation down. Because the moment people start debating the label instead of the policy, the actual question never gets answered.
What I pointed out in my resignation letter is that there was an echo chamber that was created around President Trump by key Israeli government officials and then media talking heads, basically saying that this was the only time for us to take down the regime. They also moved the red line in a very clever way. President Trump had always said that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Well, the Iranian regime under the previous supreme leader basically agreed, and they had a fatwa that made a prohibition on Iran developing a nuclear weapon. So the Israelis came in with the goal of moving that red line because basically the Iranians said they wanted to continue to have the ability to enrich. And that kind of got us into this conundrum. But then in January, when the Iranians were feeling the weight of the economic sanctions that President Trump had put on them, they took to the streets. Again, the Israeli lobby came back. The key Israeli officials came back and said, now is the prime time to strike. If you strike, there's a clear path to victory. The regime will simply just fall. And so basically, through those series of events, we were led to believe that there was a clear path to victory. But in order for the Israelis to get what they wanted, they went ahead and they said that we, the Israelis, were going to attack, again, forcing our hand and dragging us into this war.
What are your feelings about President Trump? He said since you resigned He's not a fan. He thinks you're weak on security, which does beg the question, well, why did he make you what he made you in the first place? What do you feel about his response since you resigned?
I understood that when I left, especially in the manner that I chose to leave very publicly, that he was going to have to say something. Look, I don't take any of this personally. What I want President Trump to do is to realize that the initial policy that he had towards Iran, especially in his first administration, when he utilized a series of key strikes against Iranian terrorists like Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi Mohandas, but then he leveraged the economic weight of America with max pressure sanctions. He had Iran contained. He knew that the Iranians knew that he meant business because of what he did to Qasem Soleimani, who basically walked all over Obama, walked all over George Bush. President Trump had them basically exactly where we needed them, where they were ready to get to the negotiating table. And President Trump was on the cusp of having a historic peace that I believe is still obtainable. But first and foremost, what President Trump has to do is reset and rethink our relationship with Israel. We cannot have Israel in the driver's seat of our foreign policy as it's been in the Middle East for my entire lifetime.
You say it's not personal, but he's got quite personal with you. And for context, some viewers may not be aware of this, but your first wife, Shannon, was a US Navy technician who was killed in Syria in 2019 in a suicide bombing, leaving behind your two children. You married your current wife, Heather, in August 2023, more than 4 years later. Donald Trump said this week about this.
Look, I'm not a fan of the guy. He was a man that I met at Dover. He came and his wife was killed. He remarried fairly quickly. His wife was killed.
I mean, that was a nasty dig. You married very quickly. You know, whatever he was trying to infer, it wasn't pleasant. That is personal, isn't it? Did that offend you? That hurt you?
Of course, it's personal. It's not pleasant to hear that the president speak in that manner. But look, again, the stakes are really high, Piers. I mean, my late wife was killed in one of these Middle Eastern wars that we shouldn't have been in the first place. Hundreds of my friends were killed in these wars as well. My entire generation, basically after 9/11, spent our adult lives in war.
This part right here is where everything becomes undeniably human. Because up until this point, we have been talking about policy, intelligence, foreign pressure, diplomatic failures, and all of that matters enormously. But then Joe says something that cuts through every political argument and lands somewhere completely different. He talks about an echo chamber, key officials and media figures surrounding a leader and telling him, this is the moment, this is the opportunity, the path to victory is clear, the regime will simply fall. And you have to understand how dangerous that kind of environment actually is. History has shown us repeatedly, going all the way back to major foreign policy disasters of the 20th century, that when leaders get surrounded by voices that all say the same thing, when dissenting opinions get filtered out, when someone keeps repeating that victory will be fast and clean, that is almost always when the worst decisions get made. Joe was literally inside that system, and he is telling you directly what he saw. And then Joe says we cannot have any foreign government in the driver's seat of our foreign policy. That line is not anti-anyone. That is a statement about American sovereignty. Every country on earth operates on that principle. You protect your own decision-making. You do not outsource it. The fact that this even needs to be said out loud by a former senior official is genuinely remarkable. But then the conversation shifts, and this is the moment that I think matters more than any policy argument in this entire segment. Piers brings up Shannon, Joe's late wife, a woman who served her country and lost her life in a conflict overseas. And then he plays the clip of the president making a comment about how quickly Joe remarried after her death. Let me be very clear about something. Joe Kent did not bring this up. He did not make it personal. He responded to it with more dignity than most people could manage in that moment. He said, of course, it's personal, it's not pleasant, and then immediately pivoted back to the stakes, back to the hundreds of friends he lost, back to an entire generation that grew up and spent their adult lives defined by war. That is the response of someone who genuinely means what they say. He is not doing this for attention. He is not doing this for a political career. He is doing this because he has buried people he loved in wars that he now believes, with full access to classified intelligence, did not have to happen. And when someone with that background and that level of personal loss stands up and says we are going down the wrong road again, that is not something you dismiss. That is something you sit with. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.